I'm your host, Nancy Trader. Welcome to the Stop Digging podcast, where we'll help you dig out of whatever hole you're in. Here, you can connect with experts to listen and learn from their experience and get advice for your challenges in business, wellness organizations, and relationships. Here, you can borrow from others and find what you need to create the life and work you want. Susan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Nancy, as always, every time we get together to record our podcast.
I know it's been a couple of weeks and I know you had some adventures since we talked, but we're doing a new topic today. So can you tell us what we're talking about and some background?
Yeah, I'm excited about this topic. It's a new series that we're doing. It's called Coping and Living with Health Challenges. We've been taking episodes and really just exploring the issues and the personal advice, strategies of how people are living and coping with things that they've had to experience in their life that is affecting their health. So today I'm excited because it's actually one of the most pervasive health issues that I know of in the workplace, and it starts with stress. I have some U.S. numbers right now. 83% of U.S. workers suffer from debilitating work-related stress. That's not regular stress. That's debilitating where they can't function. That represents about 5% of the entire population. Women tend to experience it more than men, but also it's good to note that when we're talking about debilitating stress and PTSD, which is the severe form of that, women are more likely to experience it than men. But out of all of the men and women, you would think that they would most likely be soldiers for war, and that's not the case. Now, workplace trauma that is classified specifically as PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, that is a person that has been under such sustained, heavy, traumatic, jolting stress that has actually changed your brain waves and you function differently. It's actually changed who you are. And the people that have PTSD are about 13 million. Now, their disrupted brain pattern through injury or cataclysmic event that serves as a catalyst for their experiences is something that can jolt them into a survival mode where they feel things and react in a way that is not necessarily reality to the situation and environment that they're currently in, because they flash back to the trauma incident. Now, there is such a thing as collective trauma. A lot of people, they might laugh that off and think, oh, that's a lot of food. We all just went through COVID a few years ago, right? From a pandemic standpoint, that caused a lot of trauma. It's called a collective trauma. You can also experience collective trauma from economic downturns that are stark. Think of the 20s. People lost everything and jumped out of windows, right? It created an ethos of desperation and trauma responses. Wars. We're in America. We haven't had a whole lot of wars on our land, but other nations, it's always a threat. And that sometimes the threat alone, if you've been through war, can sustain that trauma experience. And also pervasive injustice can create a collective trauma experience as well, where even if you haven't experienced a specific personalized trauma, you're in a community where that trauma exists and you're not necessarily reacting. You're going to react in a way that's very trauma-inducing, whether it's reality or not. These undiagnosed brain patterns that have changed can affect people in ways that they're not aware of, because our brains and people are so resilient that they find ways to overcome and function using what they have. They develop other skills, other strengths, other patterns, relational patterns, mental thinking that helps them to skirt around getting a diagnosis and actually dealing with the trauma itself. Veterans are more likely to have PTSD than a civilian, but not everyone who goes through a trauma situation actually experiences PTSD. So it's not necessarily causal. But the good news is that all the neuroscience for the last 10 years, they found whole sets of brain cells that actually can renew and reprogram. And so a lot of therapists and coaches experienced in this field are making leaps and bounds in treatments that help people develop ways to cope, to manage, to reprogram their brains so that they can function and deal with that trauma and move forward in a successful, life skill focused way. And so today, I'm always excited when we have guests, but our guest today is super special to me. I've known her for a while, and she specializes in helping people through trauma because she's been through trauma. She's a friend of ours from New Zealand, and she's working with a lot of different people in her community and also around the world. We're going to get some more information and hear her story now. And Nancy, who do we have?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Today, we're happy to be chatting with Reverend Linda-Taleo Hope, and she's going to share her unique perspective on trauma and how it affects us in our everyday life, in business and relationships. Please welcome Linda. Hi, Linda.
Hi. Thank you so much, both of you, for having me. It's a pleasure.
I forgot to let everyone know that you're joining us from New Zealand.
I live in Auckland, one of the biggest cities in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with 1 million people. For us, that's big. For your listeners, parts of the world, no doubt that will be very small. I feel very grateful to live in a place where we respect our Indigenous people. So one of the other names that we would call New Zealand would be Aotearoa, New Zealand. And what that Aotearoa component means, it's the land of the long white cloud. If you can imagine coming here by ship and you're trying to find land, then one of the signs of life or land is to see a cloud above the land formation. There's an ancient story of the 12 canoes that came to Aotearoa, New Zealand by the Indigenous Māori people of the land. And so we just acknowledge them as those people who have been able to sustain their land despite the trauma that you've talked about and despite the ongoing trauma that they experience even today. It's very inspiring of what they are able to share with us or the rest of the world. Susan knows that I'm actually Tokelauan, and what that means is that my parents hail from a small atoll in the South Pacific. It's called Tokelau. 4 atolls, Hakaaho, Nukunonu, Tahu, and the last one is Olohenga. And why I mention Olohenga is because that's under the United States in a jurisdiction, whereas the other 3 are under our Aotearoa New Zealand jurisdiction. And so we have a context where we have supposedly bicultural partnership, however, that's been problematic from the very beginning. We know that there are issues in terms of colonisation around the world, and so therefore we're deep diving already into a range of issues that affect our consciousness, societal consciousness, and the ways in which that hone in on us individually.
I liked your word picture about New Zealand's traditional name being place of the long cloud, because immediately I went to the idea of every cloud having a silver lining. And it's like you find home. And we're going to be talking about trauma today. And there's this word picture of when things are confusing, when there's a cloud over it and you know where you are, but you don't know what's going on. There's always a silver lining to that. I feel like you're going to share some silver linings with us today.
Thank you. I think in terms of the topic, which is coping and living with health challenges, I want to start from my story. And in terms of my background, I want to talk about my experience of trauma first, because then hopefully by talking about that, then I give you a little bit of other background. And so I want to say that I experienced spiritual trauma, and because of that, it took me another 16 years to heal. And in that journey of self-healing, I was still trying to live and cope. And so you end up living in 2 worlds. You put on a face that you feel you have to present to people, and somehow in the background you're madly trying to figure this other stuff out, because if it's as if your whole world is shattered and you don't know how to put all those pieces back together, and yet somehow you're expected to just do that. I'm now a 30-year Presbyterian minister. So coming at it as a school chaplain, as a assistant minister in a parish, as a military chaplain in the Air Force, coming out as a university multi-faith chaplain, coming into the community space, supporting people in terms of research around sexual violence prevention, holding workshops on suicide prevention, holding community consultations on domestic violence. In the meantime, I'm doing all these things that seem so wonderful out there, and yet inside, I'm still trying to figure out my why, because I think each of us has a why, and the why is a through space. What is my role? What is my purpose? All of these what's are the containers that we have of the different roles, either in our profession, in our home life, in our community, whatever those what's are. There's a through space trying to tie everything back to who you are. I want to just say that in the last space, I guess that was really helpful for me, was working for an organisation that supports men who have been sexually abused, supporting, providing resources and trying to come up with resources that would support my Pacific people or that particular context, because there's a recognition that some of the answers are already out there. They're already out there in your community. The problem is we don't spend the time to actually listen at the grassroots level to actually pull out the beauty that's already there. And so I find that what we're short of is often time to stop and listen, time to just be. Those fundamental of just building relationships. And again, like, how do we listen if actually we're just trying to deal with our own stuff? How do we truly listen to another if we feel as if our own stuff is not actually being able to be heard? And so my prayer is that by the end of this time, we will have hopefully some resources to help your listeners. And also, hopefully, some of these resources will help them, not just in putting my hands up and down as if they're like containers, but also that there would be a through space through each of them, which would be threads that would be able to support them become the fullest version of themselves. Because that's truly, I think, my prayer for all of us.
Linda, something came to mind when you were talking right there. So one thing that really can shut a conversation down when someone is trying to share their trauma is that the listener can't listen because it triggers their own trauma. So many people, if you've been sexually assaulted, you can't hear somebody else's story about how they were sexually assaulted, right? You don't want to hear it, and you don't want to put yourself back in that place.
Can I just quickly hold the space first before we move on to you? Some of your podcasters will be seeing this and some will actually just be listening. So I'm putting my left hand out in a kind of a flat fashion. And I want to just do that as a holding space. I want to put my hand out there and just say that you're 100% correct, Susan. When we are not healing and we're not dealing with our stuff, it feels as if, and I'm taking the right hand out, is pushing down the left hand. So what's happening is that our story it's felt as if it's been dismissed. It's felt as if it's not been heard. It's felt as if it's not had that capacity to be held. So that's why I put my hand out there first, because I think that's a very important, noticing that you've actually just identified for us and made visible. That's a trigger that we may not be able to listen because it may feel as if we will be re-triggered. I think that's a very real fear, except when we understand the purpose of our stories is to lead to helping another in their own story, then we can share our story knowing there's a purpose. We re-trigger our trauma when we think it's only going to lead to a downward spiral. So just hold that really carefully and sensitively with you. It's a very important kind of component. Also, I want to just add a cultural aspect. I love the fact that when Susan and I speak, like there's three of them, when we get together in our group of, say, 12, like we're extroverts. So we don't mind cutting people off. We don't mind just like speaking over, very expressive, and we just do that, except I'm mindful that if we've got an introvert in the room, I'll wait until we've all said our piece, or I can tell by their body language they want to speak. I'll go, hang on, let's just press pause for a second and let's just allow that person to speak, because honestly, the beauty that they want to share, but because we're not giving them the space, we don't want to take away from who we are, we just want to make sure that we're careful about what we hear. And so the listening aspect is very important.
See these combative or hostile relationships, and they just don't understand what they're going through. When there are people in the room who understand that, they can start to diffuse the conversation, lower the temperature, right? And then that gives that person an opportunity to step back and collect themselves. What's really nice I've seen too is that people in our communities are becoming awakened to this. They're watching and helping. I know this is work you're doing, but just to finish my idea is that giving them that space and also the grace to say, oh, you know what? Hey, it's okay. It's a safe space. I really appreciate that happening. Tell us more about what you're doing and because we know you've had some significant impact on your community. So please share that with us.
What you mentioned about being in a community space or a space where people are quite combative, and because I think that's quite important for us to notice. And then also to notice who has the skill sets to actually diffuse the situation or situations or the person. And I want to note that those three really important skill sets and really important things to notice. So just well done, and well done to you both. I think the fact that you're both quite aware and you notice these things is very important. You know, I'm putting my left hand out because I think the first thing I would want to say is I'm okay with a room with people who are, I'm okay with that. However, when I notice it, the first thing I'm going to do is just say, depending on what they have to say and how they're saying it and who they're directing their comments or fear to, because the main thing, if a person has been triggered to fear, and in your case, I'm going to use a scale now, 0 to 10, anything just below a 5, is what I would call a negative fear-based space, and anything above the 5 to the 10 is an ideal trust-based opportunity or growing space. So anything below a 5 is what I would call a healing space. So we want the triggers. In fact, from where I come from, I invite them. And so the main thing is that we notice, the main thing I want to separate is I as an individual, myself, and the other as an individual and who they are. And then we're talking about the room with two of us, then it's that space that we have between us or around us. It's the environment. Often people will look at the individual, I, and they might look at you, Nancy, and even Susan as individuals. However, they may not consider the vibe, the energy, the environment enough. They just know that there is something here which is just not right. So that's why we encourage that noticing of who you are, because if you've noticed that and you were able to make an assessment pretty quickly that somebody's quite combative, you're going to go into, okay, what do I do next mode, right? If I'm the person who's combative, that means I'm in below 5 space, I'm in fear. Our main responses are fight, flight, freeze, or fall. Generally, people would say the first 3, but I'm really grateful for the person who was able to add the 4th one. When you're feeling combative, you just want to fight somebody. You may know why. You may have all the justifications for that. However, the main thing is that you notice it. Number 2, what if you just want to run away? I think it's really important. These fear-based spaces provided by the limbic system is to basically get you out of danger, right? So we don't want to shut these down. We want you to know that actually this is developed for a good reason. So question number 1 is, are you in danger? Because if you're not feeling safe and you need fight to get yourself out or run away, or if you get into the freeze response, or God forbid that you should lie, but if you have to do that, I'll say whatever I need to just get out of here, then you know what? That's what you have to do. If I am feeling combative, like I want to really fight you, Nancy, like something you have said, or maybe you just look a certain way, or maybe you're smiling a certain way. I hope, who the heck knows, or whatever it is, I've been triggered. Now I just want to have a go at you. If I have this awareness of a trigger that's below 5, and you've done nothing other than just smile at me, we can say there's something here that's not quite right.
So what I'm hearing you say is that don't discount all of those reactions, those fear reactions. They're just clues. So if you read them like clues and not as character flaws or inevitabilities, you can take it to the next level if you're having a trauma attack in one of those areas, fear-based. And those are survival skills, right?
Correct.
But slowing yourself down to learn how to read the room more accurately to the situation, and what you were talking about, the space, knowing the space that you're in and what is and isn't appropriate to handle that fear.
I think what I want to add is the intuition component, because you've been given these God-given things for gifts for a reason. And so I'm trying to communicate is, first of all, recognize that you're having a somethingness. It's a fathoming process, and it takes time and practice. Once you can acknowledge you're in a space which is below 5, then now we can because now we can press pause on that, because I want to make sure if I just want to fight you, Susan or Nancy, and there is nothing you have actually done, I just want to fight you, then the first thing I want to do is go, God, there's a thing here and I don't feel safe. So I want to ask myself the question, what is it about this somethingness that has caused a reaction? And then I can turn that fathoming into some words.
So I like what you said. I'm sorry for interrupting, Linda, but I do have to say, what I love about what you just said is that you called it a somethingness, which doesn't have a characterization, a good or evil,
No
right
label.
or wrong. It doesn't have any connotation. It's a somethingness. If you can call it a somethingness that exists in you, sometimes the escalation of the fear-based reactions is to make it about them.
Correct.
So why did you smile at me that way? This is my smile, right? And that becomes a conversation conflict where suddenly I'm culpable in a way that I'm actually not, because the something is actually in you.
And what you've done is inadvertently gone into interpretation mode. And so what I want to do is slow the process down and neatly pick it apart. And I want to hold that space and go, hang on, there is something here for me, and I genuinely feel it within me. What is it? And then I might then turn that somethingness, that fathoming, into some words. We use our fathomings as components of discernment and reflection. And I want to say that this is why I want to hold the space. When we stop and say, actually, what we're feeling is 100% for me in this space and this time, we give ourselves the love that we need, the affirmation that we need, without needing to seek it from anyone else, because all of this is about reaffirming who we are. If our voice has been taken away due to abuse, if we've been sexually, physically abused, if fear has been used to keep us locked into a silo and also to make sure we never speak, then that's how we know we're on the right track, because we're moving beyond other people's limitations, including our own.
Hello, friends. Thanks for listening. A² Lamp Groups powers this podcast. Their memberships are tax-deductible donations that directly support their work developing people and organizations. But just for you, they're offering podcast listeners a special 40% off coupon code to join. Your benefits as a member include additional resources, perks, and access that you can use all year, including an additional 30 minutes of bonus podcast content for every episode. Simply use the code 4listeners at checkout. That's the number 4, all caps, listeners, at checkout. They also are giving our listeners free gifts to use now. Go to their website, asquaredlamps.org/podcast, and download your free My Success Course of Action worksheet. There is no cost, registration, or sales pitch involved. Just click it and save. Use it to work on something significant to you this month, maybe even something that sparks interest from today's podcast. Then click to join our free but private Stop Digging Podcast LinkedIn group, where the conversation continues between you, the hosts, and our guests. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And now, back to the program.
You mentioned earlier, after the introduction, that you had gone through some spiritual abuse. Can you give us an example of a situation where you're in a conversation and that spiritual abuse, you have to calm yourself down and talk your way through a situation? I'm just looking for something more practically so people can hear what that feels like.
I think for me, one of my kind of last straws working so hard in this particular context, like doing everything I could, knowing that I'm doing so well, and yet people who are clergy and in charge of me, supposedly, are saying, you're not doing well. No matter what I do, nothing's ever good enough. Using my own treasured, valued things that I really love, my faith, my desire to serve, those values that are really important to me, using them as ways to actually undermine my work ethic, my calling, my everything. However, most of the times they'll actually use those things that you cherish the most. And so therefore, when you're in a context where people are basically using silos, they might be talking about you, they'll be using unhealthy ways to actually control you, then I want to say, step back, because you know the difference between what is healthy or unhealthy, or the fact that you can notice that there's something here just does not feel right within yourself, your body, your sense of self. You know that you're going against your own value system. Sorry if I'm being so vague. If I use a person who's been sexually abused, and we know that the largest, usually it's from someone that they know, whether it's in the workplace or the home. Generally, it will be somebody that you trust, maybe somebody who is a boss or even a colleague, and maybe a friend. They will start isolating you, talking about you, undermining your gifts, your talents. They'll make sure that the ways in which they speak about you, they'll use cutting words or cutting tones, or they'll use phrases. We talk about dismissing a person. There are so many ways that a person can cut a person and hurt them. You can die with 1,000 cuts type things. And I've been in workplaces where I've supported teams where the director of a place was making sure that they looked good. They made sure that any of the work that they gave to their group, their team, it only reflected them. That means when it comes to this question of recognition, it was only about building them up. When it came to making sure that others got the credit, they made sure not to do that. And then they made sure to undermine every single person in the team to make them in it. And so it was so dysfunctional and so divisive. They would also find ways to emotionally blackmail people, not only in their team, but also others. They found information that was almost in the point of blackmailing them. So we have the issues of power, control, what a person feels that they can do in terms of, again, what kind of power do you have? Personal, positional. And I want to say that personal power always trumps positional power. And what that might mean is you, like I said, you might be a director and you might have a person in your team who's below you. However, that's why if you're in a group or in a team, one of the first things you want to do is make sure you talk to other people about this behavior. You don't try to deal with someone by yourself. In fact, that's one of the worst things you can do.
Sometimes what you're describing to me is actually self-validation. When something's in our head or in our feelings, we can dismiss it because we're trying to survive, right? But when we're documenting it, when we're writing it down, over time, what happens is you've created a pattern of documentation, of facts, of interpretations, of things that you've experienced that are outside of you. And with that validation comes a recognition that there are facts, that your feelings, if you allow yourself to create space enough to allow these other processes to happen, which happen much slower. The documentation happens much slower. The communication happens much slower. If you can just hold on to not react in the most natural way, which is valid or may feel valid, but just allow some of these other processes to catch up so that you can operate and communicate in a position of power.
When I'm working with people, what I'm just trying to do is get them back to baseline 5. And the scale from 0 to 10, just trying to get them from that below 5 space up to a 5. However, we keep asking people what their 10 space looks like, feels like. because most people are so used to being below 5. They've only been operating up. They've never been invited to imagine what a 10 space could look like. And then once they reach that, to push beyond that to another 10. And so when I'm working with individuals, communities, couples, families, what I love the most is, again, inviting people to learn more about themselves. They're pushing towards their 10 space. They're not just operating in a space of fear. Really, that's okay for survival. However, to thrive and to be your best version of yourself, we always need to unfold the 10 within us.
What does a 10 space look like for somebody who's been through like sustained trauma over time?
Like if you are a person who's experienced trauma, let's talk about clinical trauma. And I love Dr. Peter Levine's definition of trauma is a wound, a deep wound, without a compassionate witness. Imagine when we bring compassion and love to a space where a person then can just unfold. Just think about again, I like to use the image or the metaphor of a tree. You have a lower limb which has healed, and then you come up against another trigger, which is another limb further up. It feels like the lower limb that's been healed, but it's not. It's a different nuance of that. And so then what we're trying to do is say, okay, it feels the same because we've only got a limited range of emotions that we feel. However, if we were to hold space and say, what is that somethingness, then we can listen. When we heal that limb or that other branch, what happens is that your energy now can go to the main trunk. It can help you to grow up and go deep into your roots. And so that's what we're actually trying to do, is actually get people to unfold for themselves. When I think about someone I'm dealing with who's got alcohol problems, they may be high functioning, getting millions of dollars in their workplace, but they're an alcoholic. Their family is a mess. They're a mess because they've got these unresolved family traumas based on their past. Now, most people, they focus on the symptom. They focus on the alcoholism, the drug abuse, the crime. I focus on that, and I also the backstory, the other stuff that needs to come. So we're just both. However, that can't come out unless a person's actually able to, again, trust themselves. What I love is, again, it's their outcome they want. So if I'm working with someone who wants to reduce their alcohol, and I think about some of the people I've worked with, someone who had been going to rehab, had done lots of stuff, had done years been trying to break his habit. And within 10 weeks, we're breaking massive records for them. They're starting to pick their lives up in a way which they've never been able to do before. If I think about someone who's experienced sexual abuse, just being able to just hear and trust themselves, that they can be a better father, a better family member, if they can actually, or if they've been in prison. And because remember, a high number of those, at least 8 out of 10 who are in prisons will have experienced some form of sexual or other kinds of abuse. These things are not by chance. These are leakages of trauma. And most of us, if we've been able to function in some way in society, I like this other word, catalytic. That means that you've had a catalyst experience, as I have, and you're still trying to figure yourself out. However, for me, it felt like it's like a bird flying. My actual wing was broken. Once I felt that was healed, now I notice I've had a broken foot. I've been limping all this time. I'm noticing there are other things that I wasn't able to notice before. And that's the beauty of when you're actually working with people, that even in communities, once you begin to notice, what does a healthy space look like, feel like? What is that like for you individually inside yourself? Then you can notice what it could be for you in your relationship, whatever that relationship might be, your intimate relationship. And then also in your family, and then in your workplace, what would it be like? Because all of these are relationships. They're all built on relationships. Even if you're in the IT sphere, everything is still somehow you have to have something to do with people along the way.
So I want to ask a question. You described clinical trauma, and I didn't quite hear the whole description. I think what I heard was it's a deep wound without a compassionate witness. Was that right?
Yes.
A deep wound without a compassionate witness.
leaves the victim without someone to validate what happened. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then moving on from that trauma, that's where you are helping them with. Are you like that compassionate witness now because you've heard their story and you're helping them come along and helping them work through it, figuring out the why? Because that's what keeps coming up in my brain. I always ask, why is this person exhibiting this behavior? Why are they doing this thing? I want to get to the deeper level because I want to understand them. Is that part of being that compassionate witness that they didn't have originally and now you're helping them along?
100%. If you think in military terms, often what we do when you've had a post-traumatic event is we get people, maybe you don't do this in the States, however, I found this works for me and the context that I've been in. What we want to do is get people in a room. We want to get people in, as many people in a room at the same time as quickly as possible afterwards. Psychologists might disagree on the time, but 24 hours, you want to start some debriefing, perhaps not within the first, very soon within whatever that period is, because sometimes it just may not be practical, but as soon as it is within, if you have a funeral, you want to do it at the wake, but you want to have that within a really short amount of, whatever it is that you want to do, you want to have some form of debriefing as quickly as possible, because what you want to do is build in resiliency. Now, even if people don't talk, that's not the point. The main thing is that you've made it possible for people to gather in a space where there's a ripple event of a somethingness that's happened. Some people might say, don't introduce alcohol. And I would say, know your content, because definitely that's not something you want to be introducing. However, depending on the content, you want to be mindful about how to get people to be with each other. So therefore, if you think that alcohol is problematic, do some sort of an event where you are doing things together, a games thing or walking, or get something where people are just gathered and talking and socializing. And even if they're not talking, at least you get a chance to kind of begin to notice what people may need straight away. Because again, if you're talking about individually, you want to help people as quickly, again, get back into that mindset that they've got the tools, they've got the resiliency. How can they talk and reframe this in a way which empowers them? How can we go from a place of, if you've been sexually abused, from silence to entrapment, to silence to empowerment? Instead of using that silence to isolate you, we use that silence so you can reflect in a positive way, in a positive manner, to see who you've become. This no longer is a story of pain, it's a story of purpose. It's no longer just a story of suffering, it's a story of strength and resiliency. It's not the story itself that's important, it's the you that comes through this. And there's two ways I think often we should think about these stories of pain and suffering, is around one where you will be protected from a thing, from a somethingness, and sometimes where you actually have to go through it. And if you're like me, been protected and then suddenly you go through it, then it's a whole different mindset. Yet actually, hopefully it's who you become. You realize more and more it's not the thing out there that matters, it's who you are becoming from all of this. And I think that's the exciting aspect when we think about what does a 10 space look like. Well, I've got more to give to the world.
So let me ask you, what is your 10 space for your life now, moving past or through your spiritual trauma? What does that 10 space look like for you?
I was in a university which is a multi-faith space, and you know that I'm actually a really strong Christian. However, I also know when people use spirituality as a form of sexually abusing people, like they use it to basically have power over people. So I'm really grateful for me, because I was a person facilitating the work of a multi-faith team. And it would be very easy to have, say, Muslim in this corner and Hindu over there. And then it's really important that we affirm the streams and then also affirm how we can have interfaith dialogues that strengthen all of us. We had a shooting here in New Zealand, and there were 51 Muslims who were shot down by, we think it's a person, we'll say he came from Australia. However, to me, the level of trauma that he caused to that community, when we as our university went down with our Muslim chaplain to give them support, it was inspiring to hear them. It was inspiring to hear them talk about their stories. It was inspiring to have people in our own Muslim community at the university talking about how we needed to be stronger from this, for us not to go out there and replicate this kind of behavior. So therefore, for them to actually show such mercy and grace and love, like that's why for me, don't tell me you love me, show me you love me. I'm not interested in your doctrine if you can't actually show me what love truly means.
So what I'm hearing you say is that in your 10 space, as you've moved through this, is your vision for your spiritual life is a community that loves you.
You can't love anyone else if you don't love yourself. We pray that we're both on that kind of equal footing on that. I'm fortunate because in the spaces that I work in, which are, I work in the community and addiction space and workplaces, I'm not surprised how leakage comes. We've one of the fundamental aspects that is consistent is that we all need love. And so and one of the things I love about one of my favorite people is Dr. Carl Rogers, is this idea of unconditional positive regard. Now, fair enough, right? There are people out there who will lie, they will cheat, they will do all of those things. 100%, you need to be wise about dealing with those kinds of people, because obviously in terms of their journey, they are below 5 and they feel they have to be there. However, to be consistent in who I am, my greatest challenge is how I can keep loving and how I can keep moving beyond my own self to ensure that I'm consistently in a 10 space. Even when I'm in a room where I know people won't like me, purposely have done things against me, purposely hurt me, I'm so grateful every time I can show as much consistent love for them. If I can come into a room where I know there is hostility against me and make sure that I'm safe, sure they're safe, and we are working to hold that space together, I feel that's a victory for me, and I feel grateful. And for every person that comes to me and they say to me, I've been seeing this psychologist, this counselor, this for years, and you've helped me in such a short amount of time, that's how I know I'm on purpose. And please don't get me wrong, I think we're all a team. There's no one size fits all for any of us. I just want to say that my particular skill sets for those people that come to me, I feel so grateful, and I affirm everyone in their sphere. I'm just saying to you that for those people that come to me when they do, I feel so grateful. Number one, that they can share with me, and number two, that we can journey together in this space where we're journeying in a space of healing together.
I would love for you to share with our listeners. People with trauma are typically silent. If you've been silent for a long time and you're hearing yourself described in this conversation, or maybe a loved one, that have compassion for yourself and that other person, if you're trying to get the help or you've been trying to be helped, you're still in that place, maybe you're somebody who needs to reach out to Linda. And so if that's the case, Linda, can you share how people can reach out to you, either to engage you as a trauma healing person, a coach, or maybe for resources? How can they reach you?
At this stage, the best way to contact me is probably through you both. And this email is, I'll spell it P for Peter, AC, HOP for Peter, E, 3239 @gmail.com. PACHOPE3239 @gmail.com. PACHOPE 3239 @gmail.com. And obviously, if they do come through you, and I'm really happy for you to connect them to me.
For our listening audience, we're going to put your email into our Stop Digging podcast group. So if you need to do that, join the group. It is a private group, but we let you in. We just want to keep it safe for everybody. So go ahead and join the group if you need to get Linda's email again, if you didn't jot it down already. And we're here as a support team. Nancy is leading the charge here with our guests to bring these amazing guests on to help our listening audience. So if this helps you, please don't be shy. Do it on the sly. Go get that help.
I just want to say thank you, Linda, for taking the time to explain so much. I just want to talk about a couple of key takeaways here. Earlier, you mentioned some skill sets. What I am taking away from this is recognizing behavior when someone is triggered and allowing space for them to feel and try to figure out what it is they're dealing with. And then on the other side, bring people, whoever's in that room, be a support for them. Together, we talk it out, give some grace to one another, and figure out what's going on. Ask the question, why is this happening? And then getting to that, as we talk, we're reframing the story so that we can move towards resiliency and go from being silent and entrapped to being empowered and becoming our better self. And that expands out to our community. I really loved what you had to say about Dr. Carl and having that unconditional regard for others. To me, that is just love and is so all consuming. And broad and wide and inclusive. I could listen to you speak, Linda, for hours because you just have this wonderful way, and I can totally understand why you've been so successful in the work that you're doing at home and with people around the world, and really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Thank you so much. If you want to learn more, please stick around and join us for our bonus segment. We're going to be speaking with Linda a little bit more in depth. If you'd like more information, please contact us here at the website, and we will get you connected with Linda.
And
so thank you, everyone.
Thank you both, and thank your audience for just even taking a moment to be with me and just to take this time just for us to journey together and intersect other. I feel very excited for you both, Nancy and Susan, and very grateful. Hopefully something that just touches one person, then I'm very grateful for that. Yeah, blessings to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Stop Digging podcast. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please like, subscribe, and share with a friend, and connect with us on our social media channels. This podcast is powered by asquaredlamps.org.